Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Oh, hello, everybody! And welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. And remember, no matter, just go and I will find you. Or we, I should say we. I mean, one of us will find you.
If you're gonna paraphrase it as terribly as you did, you really need to at least hit the "I will find you" catchphrase. So yeah. I approve of how you did it originally.
Okay, yeah, that's what I figured. I'm like, it's gonna not make sense if I say we will find you. I'm sure
it didn't make sense to 92%
no, it didn't,
of the people, but at least
yeah.
Somebody got it. Because when you came time to hit the catchphrase, you at least got that part right. Good job.
Thanks.
What I'm here for. We just prop each other up on the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan.
Absolutely. And you, dear listener, we thank you. And you know what? We're here to prop you up because you listening to our show, that makes you a great person.
It's our whole reason for existence.
Yeah. You get a chef's kiss, dear listener. If you did a podcast in the forest and nobody was there to hear it when you chopped it down. Actually, that doesn't make a lot of sense either. Important. The point is the listeners are important. No, that's true. And we thank you for listening to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. And I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan. I'm actually a little ashamed to admit that at this point, but whatever. We're on to bigger and better things on the show.
We are indeed. Today it is OG style movie show, just the two of us, and we're going to be talking about one of Ryan's favorite directors of all time. I mean, I like him too, but I mean, Ryan is
he's in my top 50 or so.
Top 50.
Yeah, he's not one of my absolute favorites. What's cool about him is, like a lot of people, what's super cool about him and how he's in a different echelon of storytellers is that he just has this way of doing things that is signature, that is him, his visual style, his type of story, his dialogue. He has a voice. We talked about Richard Donner last week, who I adore, but Richard, he has a take on life, but he doesn't have like much of a storyteller's voice. You really can't tell that the guy who did Lethal Weapon 2 and the guy who did Radio Flyer are the same guy. There's nothing there to suggest that sure. You know what I mean? Whereas Michael Mann, John Borman, we talked about a few weeks back, they're all just making the same story. Christopher Nolan over and over and over and over again, just kind of with a slightly different premise. And this cat he gets top-notch props for that much anyway. It's unmistakable, his stuff. And I do love that about him, but we'll talk about why maybe he's not tops in my book, but still a guy whose films I like a lot.
Sure. Yeah. There are some really good films. We're going to do an old school countdown. We're going to get to that really, really quickly here. We don't really have anything at the top of the show except on this day that we are recording. Obviously, this gets released on Sundays if we are both upright. But today, the day that we are recording, is dear friend of the show, Michael Klug's birthday. So we just want to send out a Movie Show with Joel and Ryan birthday message. We love you, Michael, and thank you so much for coming on the show. You know what you get, Michael? You get the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan stamp of approval.
There you go.
And all right. So, let's just jump right into, we're going to talk about director Michael Mann And this is our list of the top 10-ish, the top 10 Michael Mann. What's that?
Top 10 and everything else we could squeeze in.
Yeah, top 10 and then a bunch of other titles that we thought, well, we got to mention these. Okay, well, it's top 10. No, it's a top 10. It is a top 10. Top 10 films of Michael Mann.
10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It is a top 10, and that's how we sequenced it. We might come to regret that later. I've been enjoying these where we've, where we go through them chronologically and then just rank them at the end or whatever. I think that's easier. This guy's, we structured this as a top 10 for those of you who care what our thinking is, because I think it works good as one, but biographically, we're going to be jumping around a bit, which we'll see if that works so great. I don't know.
Yeah. The thing about doing them chronologically is you can sort of see where, the development or where what's going on, sort of the evolution of how a filmmaker.
Exactly. There's an artistic development to it. And there's also a commercial development. Like there's a career, thing to it. Or in the case of like John Grisham adaptations or Tom Clancy adaptation, there's this, how every movie is an answer to the previous one, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you won't get that so much, but again, and we won't be deep diving these. Obviously, we don't have time, but more so, these films don't benefit much, I think, by a blow-by-blow plot explanation the way some stories do. Because, like I said at the top, it really is his voice, and it's his overall sort of human, dare I say, masculine philosophy that hangs over each of these stories. And it's what version of that are we watching, and what does it say about that? That's important. So we'll see what we can get into as far as that goes. But before we even get to number 10, there's a couple little projects that don't make the top 10 that we have to talk about. We'll benefit that one of them we've already talked about, so we don't have to spend much time on that. But Michael made his first, mark as a writer-director in the TV movie starring Peter Strauss called Jericho Mile, which is about a guy who's in prison who gets a shot because of the talent that he has to take part in the Olympics. And it's a prison, it's a TV movie. So it's really well made. I mean, it reminds me of like Spielberg's first TV movie Duel, which is very cinematic. Mann is a really cinematic visual storyteller, and he really gets the most out of the very limited time and limited budget that he has in Jericho Mile. But it's not a special visual treat like a couple of his films coming up, like just his very next film, for example. But it is that story, it's just sort of a story of redemption and atonement, and it's a very manly tale. And that's going to come up time and time again, and I don't mean it as a cheesy pun every time, but it really does. He's a very masculine storyteller. That doesn't mean the women in his stories get short shift, because they typically don't. In fact, we'll evaluate this as we go. There aren't many at all in Jericho Mile. It's a men's prison film, as you can imagine. There's not much feminine touch in it, and in that way, it's a perfect start for him. And it got a lot of attention. A lot of people saw it and were like, "Wow, this guy knows what he's doing." He's special. So that gave him the chance to break into theatrical features. And we'll get to the one that he had mighty success with at first, although it was a modest film and a modest success financially. It was still a success. It gave him the chance to take a few chances on his second theatrical feature, which we've talked about on the show before, which is the weird World War II horror fairy tale, The Keep, which is this crazy story about these Wehrmacht soldiers who show up in the middle of the Carpathian Mountains and unleash some sort of hellish demon onto the earth. and everyone involved sort of has to figure out what they're going to do about that. It's a really good gothic horror novel by F. Paul Wilson, and he wrote, and you can tell because the parts of his film that are intact, you can tell there's something special going on in terms of filmmaking, but it's very weird. It's very postmodern, very music video-ish. We talked about it. And for every moment of visual brilliance that it has a moment of intense dramatic corniness that undoes and unravels everything as it goes. And the whole movie's this battle between these two things, with half of it on the cutting room floor, never to be seen again. So we'll never really know what it was supposed to be. That sent him, because that was a huge disaster, fairly expensive film that nobody understood, hardly anyone saw, and it's the kind of thing executives look at and just say, we're not going to have this guy work on anything. I mean, this is obtuse. It's weird. It's off-putting. It's confusing. It's all that stuff that execs don't like. If he'd have just made a dumb comedy that wasn't very funny, okay, man, what's next? But The Keep killed his rep in Hollywood and sent him running back to television, where he created one of the more iconic television shows of our lifetime.
Right.
We'll get to that later too.
Yeah,
so
we'll get to that.
we cut to the chase.
Yeah, we talked about The Keep in our horror moments episode. I couldn't remember. I was like, scenes that affected us, but I know it had a better title than that.
Horror, because they were all horror moments. That was the first show Michael came on.
Was that the first one? Oh wow, so. That was that was
God bless COVID, where we
The Keep is you can see that would sort of be I like the way you put it. It's the kind that an executive will go no matter what else he might do, an executive could always go, but The Keep.
Well, it hasn't been an anchor around his neck like that, thankfully, in his career.
Well,
because
luckily
the next thing he did really was a super smash mega hit, but it's the kind of thing where he had to make a change from a career standpoint. He had to do something different, because it does literally include everything that the modern movie executive find objectionable. And there wasn't going to be a lot of support or enthusiasm left for him after that.
Yeah. And the TV project, which we'll get to in just a couple moments, although you probably can guess what it is. It is. Maybe it'll be
a big surprise for you. Maybe you don't know Michael Mann.
It did signal. There is Michael Mann does have a wheelhouse. It seems that he does feel the most comfortable in terms of a genre and a type of story that he tells. You get a lot of how to put this, because it's not all law enforcement, it's a lot of people.
It's more than law enforcement. It's typically from the criminal's point of view. It's a lot of crime dramas,
a lot of crime, but crime for people who have a code, and I think that's that plays into a lot of Michael Mann's films. Let's jump to number 10. Since we mentioned Jericho Mile and The Keep, and I do want to, we're going to talk about one of the things is, even after, The Keep sent him kind of running back to, as you said, well, he kind of had to go back to television.
Had to do something, had to shake things up.
Yeah. Even after he started making big hits again and hits in theaters again, he never shied away from television. He kept, he's the kind of guy who, pretty equally comfortable in both mediums.
He was a very important voice in television in the 80s in particular. I think into the 90s and forward, his dabbling in television has been more as an advisor and an executive rather than as the main creative force. But he took to serialized storytelling, which he enjoyed. Same with David Lynch, who's the kind of the least television guy you would think. He liked that idea of, wow, you get to spend all these time with these people and you really get to take, rather than take them from the first act to the second act, whatever, this sort of regimented idea, which even as weird as Lynch's films are, they still basically follow that structure. You get to take them during their lives, this huge part of their lives, and you get to really examine a character that way. And that, while that's stressful, having to write all that and be responsible for all that churning out so quickly, it is addictive to certain filmmakers, and he really did like that part of it.
Yeah.
And his next show after his big hit show, which wasn't a big hit, was extremely serialized, like a novel, which was very fun. So,
sure.
Like you say, and like I said, there's a common thread, both thematically and artistically, that go through these, and yet they each have they're each a variation on a theme. They're each very deliberately kind of their own thing and have their own reason for existing, which is very cool.
Mm-hmm. So number 10 is the movie Black Hat with Thor, with Chris Hemsworth.
Starting at the end, basically, because this is the last movie that he put out. So here we're talking about his life and his origins, and now we're skipping to his most recent movie from just a few years ago, Black Hat, which is a techno thriller about an imprisoned hacker who gets let out by some law enforcement types to help investigate and track down somebody who's about to make a very big move that's a big financial thing, but it's also a sort of terrorist thing. It's going to send the world markets into chaos and stuff. So Chris Hemsworth plays this. I don't know if you guys have ever met a hacker in real life, but not Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah, they very rarely do they turn out to look. Very rarely do they take breaks from hacking on their computers to do like 10,000 crunches.
If we
to make sure you get that V,
if we could take a little fly on the wall look into their prison cell, they aren't the ones doing the one-handed backwards pull-ups, on the bars of the door and stuff. They're not Chris Hemsworth. That said, Hemsworth's great. He's actually fills the role fantastically of the Michael Mann hero type, because he doesn't say much. He's a man of few words and great action, and Chris portrays, as beefcakey as he is, he portrays a lot of there's a lot of intelligence and a lot of thought going on behind his eyes, which he uses really, really well in this film. In fact, without that, all this everybody looking at each other storytelling stuff wouldn't work. So Chris gets ripped on for not being able to carry a movie unless it's a Thor movie. But to be fair to him, his race car movie is outstanding. This film is pretty good. Again, a little off-putting because you really aren't let into it emotionally. That's, if there's a downside to any of these pieces, that's it time and time and again. When he manages to pull that off, and it always feels like at the last moment he kind of sneaks in the emotional satisfaction when he does, you get it even though you weren't expecting it. When he pulls that off, he makes some perfect films, some really, really outstanding stuff. When he doesn't pull it off, you end up in the top 10, but you end up at 10 basically, which is what this story is. It's got some breathtaking visual set pieces in it. It's this huge travelogue. You go to some really exotic places. It's a big, it's got, Michael has shot some of the more amazing car chases and shootouts in particular in film history. And the shootout in Black Hat, it's not disappointing. Lots of surprises and plot twists. It's not a bad movie. It's just not a great one. It feels very out of step, and it kind of shows that, because there was a pretty big break between his last movie and that one, and now there's been a even bigger one since that one till now to present, where he doesn't have a movie. So it does show that he's a little out of step with modern storytelling, because there's not so much as a couple witty sayings, but there's just nothing to help you through the way movies and TV shows these days are designed to it almost like they can get away with more because they're being so audience friendly to you. And this isn't an audience friendly movie. It requires you do a lot of the work on your own, and that's not the style these days. Yeah. They're all like that. Honestly,
apparently, apparently Black Hat, he recut it and put out there was a recut version of it that
shown only in theaters, though. You can't get that recut.
Well, there was one time, and then it was the only, let's see, it was only at a film, the Brooklyn Academy of Music. It only played once as part of a retrospect, and then FX had it exclusively on DirecTV.
Oh,
so you had to not only have FX as part of your package, it could only be on DirecTV
version of it.
Yeah, and
that's great. That's a good way to make sure that everybody will see that. Good job.
That is of all the movies to go
I'll just tell
exclusive.
you, I've read a lot about that because I wasn't able to see it, and I was curious to what he changed.
Yeah.
So I've seen an interview with him explaining why, and it sounds like a good idea. Like he put a lot of plot up front so that you were explained a little bit better what was happening and less was revealed to you. So it made you, the audience member, have to be less patient. And I don't love that in theory, but it may make for a stronger film because the film really does slowly reveal everything to you, character, plot, all of it. But the cut is not the problem with that movie. That movie's emotionally standoffish, just intensely emotionally standoffish. And as I say, that's just not the style these days. We'd rather have piles of superficial emotion than no semblance of it, you know.
Right.
And it's not that it's not an emotional film. He has emotional reactions, but the reactions are inquisitiveness and rage and revenge. They're not the connections between people that we find important in our films. You know, the person that he's connected to the most, they barely say anything to each other. It's hard for people to take, and I sympathize, but it can't be dismissed. It was a good film. It was really well made. But
yeah. Our number 9 film is we go to the world of sports biopics, and it is Michael Mann's Ali, the telling of the Muhammad Ali story.
Yeah, Muhammad Ali, as played by Will Smith.
Yep.
One of Will Smith's better performances. Of course, it's a Muhammad Ali impression that he's doing, but you know, Will's a big time movie star, so he has that. He's got the 3 things you need. He's got his own movie star charisma where he gets to make this iconic guy his own, because Will Smith doesn't look like Muhammad Ali. He kind of sounds like him, but it's like Anthony Hopkins playing Nixon, you know. It's a great performance, but you have to get over the fact that just in the still photographs it doesn't fit or work really at all.
Right.
But that's the number one thing Will has. He's his own thing. He's his own star. He's not going to be compromised by the fact that he's not exactly like Muhammad Ali. He's going to step up big time, which he does. He's pretty great in it. He's in almost every scene of this 3-hour, you know, biography of this very flamboyant guy. Second, you have Muhammad Ali. You have a biography truly worth telling. It's really, really an interesting story. And I think, you know, I don't read a lot of biography. So I get my characters of history from the movies to some degree, which is a dangerous thing because the movies, as we've shown time and again, let themselves off the hook from telling you the real history. Honestly, if there's a great scene to be had, a good sequence or a nice happy ending, they will eschew history every time to achieve that stuff. Yeah. But this man feels, and I can only say how it feels, but this story feels like it has a lot of integrity because again, it's 9 on the list. A movie that was easier, more crowd pleasing, that took the easy way out with the character, really feels like it would have been a more fun, better received film than this one. It really does feel like he tried really hard, almost to a fault, to stick to the important sort of biographical beats. And the only blanks he's really filling in are the sort of relationship ones. And even those feel like they're kind of well thought out and researched.
Yeah.
It's a boxing movie. It's got killer boxing scenes. Our buddy Brian Bevel, who was on our crime movies of 1990 episode, He has a great theory, which is if you want to know if a director is really great or not, see if they've ever directed a boxing scene. And if they have, is it good? And if it's good, then they're a great director. Like a boxing scene is literally a litmus test for whether you're a decent visual storyteller or not. There aren't enough boxing scenes in history to prove that one way or another. But I will tell you this, the boxing scenes in Ali are fantastic. Yeah. And they have to be. They have to put you there in the ring with them and really give you that experience.
Well, yeah, and so much
it has a longer director's cut, which is a better movie because Michael, pretty much every time he does a longer version of his films, they're better. Every later cut, there's one movie that's a big exception to this that we already mentioned in our alternate cuts episode, but we'll mention it again much later on this list. But mostly when he doesn't, with, like I say, only the one exception, in my experience, he does not revisit his projects and not improve them. It doesn't start with an invitation to redo the movie. It starts with him coming up with, oh, I should have done this. This should be like this. This would help a lot. And then he sort of impulsively fixes it. Mm-hmm. And the long version of Ali is the better one, just in case you're curious, because you may have a choice. I mean, long biopic, the more bio, the better. You feel like you've lived more of his life with him. Right. So even if it's more of what you don't like about the movie, which is that it's a little staid, it's a little boring, again, a little not terribly emotionally involving.
Well, that's the big, I think that would be the big criticism. You know, you have someone with that is just this huge personality and this iconic person in the history of sports and in the history of, especially of Black culture.
Sure.
And he, you know, you mentioned it. It feels more like Will Smith is doing an impression of Ali, where it's like you get a sort of sense of technical accuracy, but you know, one of the things that that when you like when you mentioned with Nixon and Anthony Hopkins, and maybe
that's my favorite one, because it's like Anthony Hopkins is not Nixon, and yet it's really hard to watch that and go, he didn't nail something of it.
Because they lock in on they get to the essence of the person instead of just doing the mannerisms, and that's I think that might be, no knock against Will Smith. Will Smith is a great actor, but I sort of felt like I still never really got Muhammad Ali. Yeah. I did not feel the emotional investment that for this guy who was so incredibly outspoken on social issues, and then also this just larger than life character in the sporting world, where that people would be like literally he would be a joke, he'd be a laughingstock if he wasn't such an amazing boxer to be able to back it up.
Yeah, Will gets to the essence of the character in terms of what his public persona was.
Sure,
and that's what a movie star brings to the thing. As far as who the private man was, the movie just doesn't have much of an answer for that. And there are a lot of biopics that are like that. Man on the Moon's like that. There's just a massive list of them where really what we got is what was in front of the cameras, and that's the part that the movie nails that. That's enough, but it's not. It's not everything that you would want. The same way Selma feels like a history lesson in a way, because you feel like the real people involved are impenetrable. But then when it comes time to reenact that event, it still sort of takes your breath away. So this movie's still struggling with that balance. But the loudmouth public guy out in front of the cameras, the fun humor of him behind the scenes, all that Will masters. But it's like, it's not even the actor's fault in this case. The movie just doesn't concern itself enough with who he really was. I think because it can't. Yeah. And I think it doesn't. I think it's afraid to just make that stuff up, if that makes any sense. But it's It's 9 on the list because it doesn't give you an answer for that. It's a pretty long movie to sit through and feel like you really only saw the highlights of Muhammad Ali's career reenacted. This was a guy who at the time the movie came out was still around or had just recently passed. But even sports people, even biographers interviewing him and stuff, they never got much out of him. So it's partly him that is, public persona really is the thing that we're left with.
Yeah.
And that's probably all we're right to anyway. So who knows?
Sure. Okay. So
but you're not wrong, Joel. You nailed what's missing perfectly. Yeah.
The next up is this is the project. Well, this is how to describe what we're going to do with the next one here. I mean, we're going to talk about the movie version of
top 10
movies of Michael Mann.
So
that's
movie
what we're
version about on the episode. We're going to mention some of these other projects. This next one of which is monumental in his career, and we're just not going to talk about it much. We're just going to kind of give you the biographical beats of it and move on to the movie. That's going to seem a little weird, but maybe someday.
We're going to get to the movie version of Miami Vice in a moment, but you can't talk about the movie version of Miami Vice without talking about the television show Miami Vice. Absolute iconic television show of the 80s, maybe the most iconic in terms of its
in a lot of ways. I think
culture.
It is. It came along in what, 84?
Just was looking at it here and oh, come on. Where can I see it? Give me my dang dates. Where's my dates?
It came along at the zenith of the Technicolor sort of 80s.
Yeah, 84 to 90.
Yeah. So
the show that taught us all to push up our suit sleeves. And that it was okay to wear a t-shirt underneath our sport coat. But yeah, no. So this was, this is after the Keep. Michael Mann was looking for work, and a guy from wasn't it Hill Street Blues? What was that dude's name?
I can't remember his Frank.
Yeah, he had a script. He had an idea of essentially Hill Street Blues, but let's take it to sunny Miami.
Right. And it's not Hill Street Blues because it's not an ensemble show. It's about these
it's
about these two vice cops, and the crimes are not street crimes and city crimes. They're big time sort of drug and smuggling and contraband type crimes, which are an uglier, much more serious kind of thing involving a much uglier and more frightening villain.
Yeah.
From episode to episode. So
and again, something, the whole idea of drug culture and especially things like cocaine and heroin and stuff, that was especially cocaine. That was the 80s.
Well, and Mann's and it can't, before we move on from Miami Vice, because it really is its own show. If you're a movie show with Joel and Ryan fan out there, you have a lot to say about Miami Vice, the TV show. Step up, send us a message, and we'll do a whole show about it with you. We can't do that here. But just the last thing I'll say about Miami Vice, his embrace of the mid 80s style music video and how he got that into every show, just the slick whateverness of it. And Miami Vice is very much a Michael Mann project in that it's a very masculine from the alpha male point of view. That's where the thing comes from, big time. And it's 10 times cooler than anything that was on TV at the time. And yet it's twice as cheesy as anything he would ever commit to film.
Sure.
And those two things they're in that magical crowd pleasing spot that we rarely ever see from him in his cinema work. They just fit in. They just go together perfectly and wonderfully, and people tuned in every week for that for a while. That show, people got tired of it pretty quickly, like they do of shows that are high concept and high style like that. It limped along to 1990, but it was really those first couple of years, 84 to 86, where it was the number one thing on TV, and everybody just loved it.
Yep.
And for good reason. It was super slick and entertaining, really satisfying television to watch and easy to get wrapped up in.
Yep. And also important to, I feel important to mention about the TV show before we move on, the awesome music by Jan Hammer.
Yeah.
And his
theme song and a handful of other things that he wrote for the show are really good. We mentioned Jan Hammer and the Miami Vice music in the electronic themes, even though that was about movies too. We just couldn't help but bring it up because Hammer is he's a staple of that style of music. And, you know, he's that weird guy. Lives in a weird Hollywood home with lots of palm trees and evergreens and stuff. But you go in there and he's this strange, like European looking dude who's just got wall to wall synthesizers, and he programs them to make sounds like no one else can. And that's the gloriousness of electronic music, like it just in a nutshell. So that stuff is fantastic. And he integrated, you know, all the Brazilian rhythms and all that sort of Caribbean sounding stuff into it. And smart music.
So years after the you know, creating this iconic television show, you know, so I guess 16 years after the show goes off the air.
Before you say the name of it, which we know what it is because we just said it. But he needed another hit. He needed another big hit, and people wanted him to make another movie like what your best movies were, you know. And not. Again, I said it. He makes the same movie over and over again. I really believe that's true, but he needs some sort of other way into it to inspire him to create that story again. And this is the movie on the list where it didn't have that. What he did was he just took this kernel of an idea from his most successful project and then tried to tell a very serious cinematic retelling of it. The Miami Vice, the movie, but it really does feel like a holding pattern of a project. You know what I mean? It feels like it's a good movie. It's better than Ali and it's better than Black Hat. And those are both good too. So there's a lot to like about it. But what it absolutely doesn't have is what I told you the magic ingredient of Miami Vice, the show was, which is just fun. This film isn't fun at all. It's like it's movies.
Well, yeah, and you think of television products that were projects that were made into movies in the 90s and 2000s. They almost all of them do it with a wink and a smile, and you know, no matter what the
original thing was.
Yeah,
right. This doesn't. This takes
and
the
this
premise
is not.
and it tells it in a straight crime drama with the emphasis on drama way, and it's good. It's very rewarding if you can accept it as that. I found it a little off-putting the first time I saw it, but I've seen it a couple of times since, and it gets better every time. That's a sign of a pretty good story and a pretty good movie. Really, really well acted by Jamie Foxx and Colin Farrell.
Yep.
And who's the woman in it? She's fantastic.
Naomi Harris.
Yeah, she's good, but it's the other one, the one who's actually wrapped up in the crime problems.
Elizabeth Rodriguez, or are you talking about Gong Li?
Gong Li.
Yeah.
Gong Li's pretty much the best Hong Kong actor ever, male or female. You know, we usually say actor. We don't say actress a lot on the show, although that's nothing wrong with that. But Gong Li is... Gong Li's just top notch. If you need somebody to show up, she's the ultimate, honestly, or the ultimate refinement, I guess, because she's certainly not the best female character we come across on this list, but she's the total ultimate refinement of a Michael Mann, mysterious, gonna make you change your whole life and make you take every risk you never dreamed of type of lady. And she just does it by doing so very little. And I know that maybe doesn't sound interesting, but I just gotta tell you, Gong Li's just special. She's just a really, really special actor. You cannot go wrong, even in her dumbest movies, you know, Hannibal Rising, and there's a list of them. She's not in only good things, but every time you pick up a film that she's in, you're going to get the benefit of a fantastic female character played by pretty much the best in the business. And if she were, well, in a way, if she were American, she couldn't exist. So we're grateful to have her as she is.
Sure.
Because she wouldn't be that person, you know. There is this Chinese kind of reserved thing about her that is awesome. So Miami Vice has all the things you want. It's got a boat chase. It's got one of the ballsiest, craziest shootouts I've ever seen in a movie. It's got this incredible, intense siege sequence on this drug house. There's some humor in it. You know, Jamie Foxx is in it after all. He can't help but be his kind of chilled, charming self. But even that is, you know, it's a serious film about a serious sort of vice, you know, drug cartel, and that stuff is not pleasant stuff. But if you thought, well, it's not Miami Vice, or it's not my Miami Vice, or hashtag
right.
not my whatever the name of the lead character in Miami Vice is, whose name is slipping me, Crockett
and Tubbs. Yep, Sonny Crockett.
I sympathize, but taken on its own, it's quite good.
Yeah.
And it also has a re-edited version that's better. But that's, I think for Miami Vice, the film, that's the only version really you're going to stumble across. I think it's actually hard to go back and find because that's the version that hit home video, and you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So. Okay, next up is the 2004 Tom Cruise, Jamie Foxx in Collateral.
This is one of his most beloved films. It's a little low on my list because I think that the Tom Cruise yappity yap sort of bad guy is not in keeping with what Mann's strengths are, even though it's a really fun role for Cruise. He doesn't play many stone cold assassins in his career. He really is the bad guy in this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a spoiler to say that. He basically is in town with a few people to kill, and he takes this cab driver hostage and takes him on his mission with him. And Fox plays the cab driver, and it's this sort of impossible situation for him. He's unmatched by this super assassin guy. I think in this scenario, I think part of the reason people love it is because Cruise's monologues and stuff, this crazy, egotistical, psychotic guy that he plays is super entertaining, but it does, the whole movie does feel, at least to me, like a bit of a put on. I have it at the spot, like I have it above what I think are the lesser movies, because it's a fantastic movie. I believe it's his biggest hit movie. I think that Michael Mann, Tom Cruise, like connection, like is the thing that made it a huge hit. Mm-hmm, and allowed him to make his next few films, which were, he kind of made them however he wanted, which was his reward for making a big hit for Paramount. Paramount even asked him if he wanted to recut The Keep when this premiered, because it was the only other property that they owned of his. And he said no.
Not interested in going.
In fact, he said, if you really want to do me a favor, just bury that piece of crap.
Yeah.
This is, I wasn't in that meeting, so I don't know the exact words that were used, but
right.
It's a for Keep fans, it's sort of this thing that The Keep was about to be released on DVD, and after Collateral came out, suddenly it wasn't. And all this stuff that we'd been hearing about them trying to sort of put it back together again just all went away. And it just makes us all very sad, but whatever. Yep. So I also blame Collateral for that. So maybe I have it a little lower than some people would, just for that purpose alone. I don't know. Because it's really fun. Again, really kind of amazing shootout in the middle of it. There's you have to like that sort of character. I personally really, with only a few exceptions, don't like a super chatty villain. I find the more they say, the less scary that they are. Mm-hmm. But this film proves that if you do it right, it doesn't have to be that way, because Cruise's character's turns, his turns from the friendly, jokey, whatever guy to the psycho killer guy are jarring and surprising and effective. So it works in this movie, but that's still what it is. It's a couple of really super chit-chatty dudes on this really awful bender together, basically in the nighttime. And it's LA, right? It must be.
Yeah.
Very
he's
LA.
He's only in LA for a day.
Only a day.
Yeah,
oh, right.
Is what,
That's
is
the
what he tells him.
catchphrase.
Yeah. It's only, yeah, I mean, I just remember that when he says, the catchphrase was, the tagline was, "It started like any other night."
Yeah.
But yeah, I just remember him telling Jamie Foxx, is like, "I'm only in LA for a day and I need to make a couple stops."
He's only in LA for a day is a much better tagline, by the way. Paramount executives, just so you know. It's right out of the movie.
I do find it well, interesting, I guess. But like all the kind of all the people that they were looking at for the film, before it eventually, became Tom Cruise and Jamie
became
Foxx.
A Cruise Wagner production.
Yeah. But it was that that role, the Jamie Foxx role, was always sort of like all the people that are, a couple people listed here, they all come from a comedy background. So there was clearly an effort to try to make sure that when it's light, when we're supposed to be having fun, to really make sure that we get some people that know how to, like Adam Sandler was considered for that role. It was going to be Adam Sandler and Russell Crowe, which is
not bad, with
Mimi Leader directing.
Not bad.
Yep, that would have been interesting.
Who wrote Collateral?
Huh?
Who wrote it?
It was Stuart Beattie. He was
Michael Mann, although he could have done his own pass at it, could not have written this script. It's very clear that it was done by somebody else, because even though it has the feel of the thing that he tends to make, these characters are just not. They didn't come from within him at all. And that's where the difference is. And it just shows you, if Michael Mann had written it, it would have always been a Michael Mann film. It was Cruise and Paula Wagner that brought it to Mann. And that's where it all sort of came together. So that's not typically how it is. And it makes the film a little different. And it made the film a big, giant mega hit. Like whatever is missing from that easygoing, like just that easy entertainment that's missing from Michael's other works, it's in this movie. So that's why it was such a big hit. It certainly didn't shy away from the violence or any of that stuff, but it got that rhythm of a fun entertainment thing right, which is pretty cool.
Okay, next up is the movie from 2009, Public Enemies.
What number are we on?
What? We are at number 6.
6.
Yep, no. Public Enemies. And we're also gonna, so Public Enemies, John, the John Dillinger, it's
Johnny Depp is John Dillinger. That's the best way to say what the movie is. And Dillinger's a really interesting character from history, from the gangster era, from the Prohibition era. He's a fascinating one. And the guy, the Fed that was on his case, is a fascinating guy too, played by Christian Bale. Plus you have Billy Crudup playing J. Edgar Hoover, and Stephen Graham as, I want to say, Babyface Nelson.
Yep.
Stephen Graham. Damn. Stephen Graham is this British guy who's always playing these American gangsters, because he really does have that young De Niro sort of just, he's stunning. Without spoiling it, this is a spoiler, I guess, but Babyface Nelson's death scene in Public Enemies is one of the craziest, most horrific and yet beautiful things in all movies. I don't know quite how to explain it. Yeah. It's just gloriously choreographed, almost romantic thing that is also horrifically violent and feels very believable. That's where Michael Mann lives, where those two things come together. And that happens several times in this. Marion Cotillard plays the love of Dillinger's life.
Billy Frechette.
Again, just really outstanding, a really outstanding actor in a very interesting role. We talk a lot. I don't think there'll ever be a Michael Mann movie that has like a heroine or a woman at the center of it. But these these ladies, and they're almost corny. They're the opposite of corny in that they're not there to serve this sort of cheap Hollywood purpose, but at the same time, they tend to be like Gong Li, this woman, their couple coming up. They tend to be these perfect, worshipful, beautiful, articulate. Like they don't feel like real people. They feel like these female ideals. And that's a trap. That's not the worst trap you can fall into as a male writer, but it's still a trap that we have to acknowledge. You're not really, you're writing them to the point that they're almost not a person. They're some statuesque thing. It takes a really good actor to show up on set, like Cotillard, like Lee, these are as good as there are, to bring some sort of soul and vulnerability and actual personhood to these saints and, people that he creates.
Yeah.
And Marion does it as good as anyone ever has. She's really, really outstanding in the film. And it's just got a whole ton of really great character actors and stuff at every step of the story. It's weird. It was a little off-putting to me at first, although I've adjusted because so many more things have been made this way since. But it's this old period Prohibition gangster film that's shot on super digital style cameras, and that was tough for me to take. That what I've called in the past that sort of surveillance camera video style mixed with a period drama, which you expect to be fuzzier and gauzier, something softer somehow visually. It's just this very sharp video-y looking thing.
We kind of but and there's an element to we're going to look back in time. Yeah. That a director can do with the visuals and
I assure you, he didn't choose that way of doing it. He could have done the movie any way he wanted. He chose that for a reason, but I think for your average moviegoer, I don't think you'll care. But for movie buffs like us, when we were watching it, we were like, "Well, that's weird that he did it like that." But it's great, and it reminds me. There's a similarly great movie. It's even more low key, but with Brad Pitt, called The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. And that movie's about the celebrity of being an outlaw. And Dillinger is very much about the celebrity of being an outlaw too. There's this fantastic scene where he wanders into a police station where they're working on his case. And he just walks along. He just walks by all the cops in the place and sees his big board, or whatever you would call it, this giant billboard with all the pictures of places he's been and the yarn
and the links and everything. Yeah,
exactly. All the stuff. And he just kind of watches his whole crime career go by in front of him. And he's standing there doing it with these cops walking by. And of course, today, you couldn't have that. Everyone would know who you were. There'd be thousands of pictures of you. In these just sort of represents the last era of America where it's possible for you to be this crazy thing and have nobody recognize you on the street.
Where you can create this myth that permeates, and that's why these gangsters were like mythical figures, is they the crimes that they committed, unless you lived in the city, you read about them, they didn't really affect your life. And so you got,
so they became the comic book characters of the time. And that's why they all, Pretty Boy Floyd, like the whole list of them, that's why they're all still remembered today, and all remembered for their most superficial, they're all nicknamed for their most superficial categories. Pretty Boy Floyd is being seen hunted down by Christian Bale's character early in the film. And he has this thing where he says, why do people call me that? And it's because he's this gorgeous teenage matinee idol looking dude, he's played by somebody pretty famous now too in it. It was less famous at the time.
Here, Pretty Boy Floyd. Channing Tatum.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, it's not a Channing Tatum movie. He's only in the movie for a couple minutes, but
this is early Tatum.
But it's great. It's a great moment for Channing. He really nails it. Because it is about that. There's something behind Tatum's eyes when he's lying there in that field, breathing his last breath, where he doesn't get it. He doesn't get his own mystique. You know what I mean? And if he ever did, he really doesn't now that he's been laid low. And it's about that. It's about these guys and their personalities and what drives them. Gillinger, and that's why he's the perfect old school gangster for Mann, is because he, as Joel pointed out, he really had a code, very much had a way of operating that was, you know, because he could shoot him up with anybody, but he didn't like shooting people. He didn't want to shoot hostages. He didn't hang out with psychos. And if he ended up with one, he didn't tolerate them for very long, because he just knew that however folk hero he could be to the public, that had its own value when he showed up at a certain bank. Partly, I think he just wasn't psychotic and didn't want to kill anybody, but there was more to it than that. He recognized the value in being something of a gentleman highwayman of his time. Yeah. His apprehension, his final moment in the movie, I mean, every second of it has been preserved throughout history, who all the players were, where they were on the street. It's one of those things where it's one of those things where from that time, the lines really aren't very blurry. This stuff has all been told. Where he sat in the movie theater, what movie they were watching, every single thing about that has been preserved in history, and it's all recreated by Mann really brilliantly. And Joel said, because this is pretty much my list and not Joel's, Joel said to me last night, we'll just go with your list. Blah, blah, blah. But, you know, the only one I would do differently is I would certainly have Public Enemies higher. Yeah. And not by much. I haven't seen our number 5 film. And I mean, and our number 4 film is fine. I like it. It's a great film. I just would put it a little higher. So I probably would have this for me. 4. It's weird. Collateral early should be the leaping off point, because that's where his movies get really rather unimpeachably good and stay that way till the end. But for me, the leaping off point is here. It's I was riveted by Public Enemies. Me and my dad went to see it, and there was this obnoxious guy sitting in front of us on his phone the whole time, and we still were riveted by it, just really amazed by the whole thing. And I still feel that way when I see it. So it's a great role for Johnny Depp. You know, he played so many cartoon characters in the Tim Burton films and the pirate movies. Right. And this guy is larger than life in a lot of ways, but he has to be a real person that appears on screen in front of us, or the consequences for what happens to him and the people close to him wouldn't mean much to us. And it's one of the few modern roles where he really pulls that off. This is like, you know, the commitment with which he brought to Donnie Brasco is what he brings to Dillinger. And this that very lived in, just very embodies this guy. Now you also have mentioned here Crime Story, which is a show I'm not familiar with. Well, Crime Story was that was the other TV show that he did after Miami Vice became a big hit around 87 or so, I want to say. And Wise Guy was on TV at the time. 86 to 88. Yeah, so Crime Story's got 2 seasons. It's like this. It's not connected really to Public Enemies, except that it's a vintage Prohibition era crime story. Oh, okay. That's where it takes place. It stars Dennis Farina. And do you have it in front of you? Who's the other main actor in it who's fantastic? Anthony Dennison, who I wish was in every show. One of my absolute favorite actors of the 80s. And I just feel like he just kind of disappeared. And it sucks because he's spectacular. He's really, really good in really, really good in Crime Story. He was really, really good in Wise Guy when he took over for Ken Wall for half a season after Crime Story wrapped. He's just an outstanding leading man. And of course, Farina is what he is. Dennis Farina, we'll talk about him, I think, either in our next movie or the one after that. You know, Dennis Farina, his career started at being a law enforcement consultant for Michael Mann on a film. Oh, sure. That Michael Mann discovered him, if you will, and started putting him in his movies. And as he appeared in his movies with slightly bigger and bigger roles, he showed himself to be a really spectacular actor, and really got to prove that in an awesome career of acting before he passed on. And we're grateful for both of those guys for bringing Dennis to us, because he's He's kind of the perfect Michael Mann, you know, cop. It just, you know, because that's what he was. To Michael, he was all cops. You know, he was the cop, alpha cop, basically. He was an armed robbery expert, specialist, Chicago police officer, and that's how he got into movies.
You got to like that, you know. When I'm remembering it now. Especially when they it mentions the use of Runaway by where is that? I was just looking at it. Oh no,
nobody knows what you're talking about, even me.
What's that?
What are you talking
the opening theme, the use of the song Runaway from Del Shannon.
Who in what?
In Crime Story.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I'm like, I remember that show now. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's like that's like, oh yeah, I remember that. I don't remember the show very well, but I love the idea of it is nice. You know, you get this, you have a mob boss, you have a cop, and they're, for some reason, they just want to destroy each other.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what they get to do.
Yep,
and
it is.
Every week,
it's a really good show. It's if it had only lasted a half a season, we would lament it as one of those shows that was the best thing ever that just got canceled prematurely. But it lasted 2.5 seasons, so it lasted just long enough to start not getting good anymore, which is kind of the perfect time for something to go away. It's a good show, Crime Story. If you catch it streaming someplace and you don't mind watching something in Academy ratio and standard definition, which takes a little getting used to after all these years of glorious HD that we've had on our TVs. Mm-hmm. But it's worth your time. It's a really, really good character show and has really, really well done period stuff in it, cars and costumes and stuff. It's really awesome. Guns, Very if you're cool. Into that. All kinds of cool guns.
Okay, so tell me about, now this is saying it's his first feature film, Michael Mann's first feature film. Our number 5 film is 1981's Thief with James Caan. And I gotta admit, I don't know this. I can see one of the reasons why you love it. One of the reasons why you love it, it's got a score composed by Tangerine Dream.
Well, it's on our electronic film scores episode. Yeah. Actually, we talk about how awesome this score is. It's really close. If it's not my favorite Tangerine Dream score, it's maybe my second favorite. It's really, really, really outstanding. Thief is this urban noir story about this cat burglar played by James Caan. And he has pretty much his best role. I don't know, Sonny Corleone, right? I mean, he's got a couple really awesome ones, but in terms of a movie that he carries himself, I've never seen him better than he is in this movie. Tuesday Weld.
Misery. He's really good in Misery, but yeah.
Yeah. And playing against type in Misery, he sort of knocks your socks off, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, but you're right though. He does play against type in Misery, so. Yeah,
that's what's great about it, because it's not a performance you expect from him, and even though it has something of him in it, he brings something personal to it. It's a brave performance in that way. James is this ultimate sort of Hollywood gangster type guy.
Tough, he's a tough.
He is. He's Jewish.
Up until Misery, that's what he played. Yeah.
So it's weird that he is what he is, because he plays this, but he is that. This guy is it's a Michael Mann movie. This is the perfect Michael Mann protagonist. This cat burglar with a code, this guy with the, who's getting pushed and pulled in all directions, pushed and pulled by the cops, pushed and pulled by the organized crime people, pushed and pulled, even though he's encouraging it, from this new woman that he's met, played by Tuesday Weld, and what I think is her best performance. Maybe she grew into being a great crazy old lady too, so I don't want to knock any of those awesome roles because they were neat. But this one in terms of being the glamorous lady of desire, it's a fantastic part for her. They have these very Mamet sort of exchanges, and we see this guy in a later film. It's really the exact same guy. the exact same character with a different name and in a later, even better movie. But we see that sort of life philosophy. Hey, that I'm going to live large and live the way I want to as long as I can. But when it comes time for me to choose running and foolishly trying to hang on to what I have in vain, I'm running. I'm clipping that wire at that moment, and I will not be able to stop, and I will not spare anybody in my way when I do it. And that this movie ends like that, as you would expect. He has the big speech about it, so you can damn well bet, and it's just James Caan with the welding goggles on and the sparks flying and the cool blue evening, midnight dusk. It's like they're just so stylish and slick. It's so kind of perfect for Mann. Those visuals mixed with the gurgling synthesizers and stuff, and even Jim Belushi's good in it. Robert Prosky's outstanding in it. It's just really, really good. And the fun thing is that there's this thief. He met these two guys who really formed his career in a large way. The thief, whose name I can't remember, who plays a cop in the movie, and the cop, Dennis Farina, who plays a thief in the movie, or more of a bodyguard type guy than a thief, really. But a bad guy anyway is the point. He enjoyed the juxtaposition of letting these two real life cops and robbers who knew each other and were friends with each other. He enjoyed flipping them and letting them be the other thing in this Hollywood fantasy land. And the film has that sense of fun to it, even though it's a serious film. It has that sense of it's hard to explain, but it has that sense of playfulness to it. It's fantastic. It's one of those, more people I think saw it on HBO than saw it in the theaters, but it's really, really well regarded film. Joel, you should absolutely see it, and everybody should see it.
That's great.
It's really, really good. It's a little old, but it captures that 1981 Chicago in a sort of glorious way too. The guy owns a bar. He kind of launders his money through his own businesses, owns a used car lot where he drives a different Cadillac every other week. And, it's hard to explain. He doesn't call a lot of attention to himself, and yet he likes the good things in life, which is why he's a thief, because that's the easiest way to get rich,
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's a really good movie. It's a character movie. It's also the film debut of not just Dennis Farina, but William L. Peterson and a handful of other actors. First film was Thief, which is kind of neat. Chicago actors. Yeah,
William Peterson. Willie Nelson's in there. We didn't mention Willie Nelson. Gotta mention
Willie
him.
Nelson's great in it. What a cool role for him. Willie Nelson looks a lot like the guy, the thief in question, the thief consultant, which I think is why he was cast. John Voight plays the same guy in a later film.
Yep. So the next movie has our number 4 movie has like the for a long time it was like the greatest little trivia answer for movie nerds who loved Silence of the Lambs, and anybody who loved Silence of the Lambs, movie nerds got to trot out this movie, which is a great movie. And it is number 4 is Michael Mann's Manhunter.
Based on Thomas Harris's Red Dragon.
Yep.
It was going to be called Red Dragon, but Year of the Dragon and some other dragon thing had just come out and hadn't done very well. So their metrics told them that dragons don't do well.
Dragons in the title.
Even though there's no dragon in Red Dragon, really. A metaphorical dragon, I guess. Yeah. They changed the name to Manhunter, which is not a bad name for it, to be honest. Nope. Thomas Harris's Red Dragon's really great. This film was obscure in 91 when Silence of the Lambs came out. It isn't anymore. It's been adapted now a couple of times. This one's really well regarded. It's really high on this list because this was the film this was his step back into cinema after Miami Vice was a massive hit. Thief was the movie he made to put him on the map and allowed him to make The Keep. And then The Keep's the movie that sent him crawling back to TV. When he was allowed to make another film, because Miami Vice was such a hit and he was back in vogue again as a storyteller, he made Manhunter, and it was produced by Dino De Laurentiis. And it's great. It's hard to imagine Thomas Harris's novel being adapted much better. It's got really pretty great performance by William Peterson in not his debut performance, but one of his early performances. He's quite good in it. Again, Dennis Farina's in it. And Brian Cox plays Hannibal Lecter in it pretty effectively, I have to say. But it's a weird story that, in every way that Silence of the Lambs is grungy and has this dark, dirty brick, sort of old-fashioned, old world looking feel to it. Manhunter is this ultra slick, white-walled, mid-'80s chic, strip lighting. Like, it's everything about 85 that was slick and whatever. It really feels like a weird 1985 time capsule because of that. Same way Miami Vice does, but even more so because the fashions, the music, everything is so exaggeratedly 1985, 86. But it's a really good story if you're into serial killer stories, or if you've only seen the we won't call it a remake, but the second film, Red Dragon, that Brett Ratner made. You owe it to yourself, I think, to see the Michael Mann movie. It's different, but it's very, very cool.
Yeah. Really
involving the big finale with In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida blaring out of the speakers and stuff. And it's more style than substance for sure, but there's enough substance there to justify all the style that it throws at you. And that's what's so cool about it. Tom Noonan, Joan, our favorite ever.
Yep, Joan Allen.
Joan Allen in a very early performance. Again, another Chicago actor. That's not an accident. Michael Mann is a big time Chicago guy. It's good. Manhunter's really, really good. And if you haven't seen it in a while, it's worth checking out again. And if you've never seen it because you feel like you know the story, because Hannibal tells the story again, the TV show, and Red Dragon tells the story again. I get it. It's the same story, hasn't changed, but it's still really worth seeing, I think. Thomas Harris's novels is really, really good too. Red Dragon and following Silence of the Lambs, those are as good a crime novels or hunt the killer novels as there are. It's easy to say that since they're big hits or whatever, but it's okay to say it because it's true. It just our sense of familiarity with it, or a sense of the cliched sort of Hannibal character going a bit off the rails, doesn't change the fact that those are really, really good stories, and they were turned into really good films by really good filmmakers. So
our number 3 film, I gotta admit, I always forget that this was directed by Michael Mann.
But it does feel like him, and yet it is a step into a whole nother world.
Yeah, it's just because it's like, oh yeah, it's just like this feels like, for some, Ali, even though it's not a crime film, it's this, person. I don't know. Ali feels like it's somewhat more in line with
it fits
with the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it fits. But our number 3 film, Last of the Mohicans, it feels it's this sort of weird outlier, but it's obviously it's a stunning movie visually, critical hit.
It's based on a novel, so it's not Mann's characters that you're experiencing, but the characters are very intense, very masculine, men of few words, like that sort of thing. I mean, I can see why it appealed to him, because it really does feel like the kind of story he would tell, just in a very undocumented, both in literature and in film, era, the era of the French English sort of Canadian upstate New York territory wars, while all of the East Coast Native Americans were sort of getting pushed to the frontier. It's a really interesting time in history. and his characters are really sort of fascinating. And him and Christopher Crowe, I don't know whose idea it is. I suspect it's Mann's, but I don't know. Two really, really good writers. Christopher Crowe is top-notch dude. Collaborating on this thing. And what they did is they swapped there's two Native American / colonial women relationships in the film, and they switched them so that the two alpha male and alpha female and the beta male and beta female would be together instead of having it all complicated. Mm-hmm. And it's brilliant. I've read this book, the James Fenimore Cooper novel, which is a bit of a tough read because it's, again, and not because it's not a compelling story, because it's great. It's more because it's just this thick, dense sort of period language that is I struggle with. But it's great and it works great, but the movie almost is better. Like, that decision is like a decision someone somewhere along the line, this has been made into a movie several times, should have made already. Like, the author should have made it. Really feels that right, that Hawkeye, the main character played by Daniel Day-Lewis, and Cora, the main woman played by Madeline Stowe, both at the tip top of their game, at least in terms of Hollywood glamour and sort of period awesomeness. The thing works best of all because it's got tons of period adventure in it, lots of brutal murder, lots of brutal, loud, incredibly loud, Oscar-winning sounding warfare. Just great cast of characters, a fantastic villain played by Wes Studi in an Oscar-nominated performance. Just a fantastic actor in a career-defining role. And it's got Daniel Day-Lewis, got kind of the best actor of his generation playing this matinee idol hero, which is really fun to see because Daniel only did that the one time that I'm aware of. Truly, you know, he kind of been there, done that, and he went on to the next thing. It's a romance. That's why it works. All that other stuff aside, of which it has in spades, the reason this works and the reason it's so high on the list is because the romance works without a lot of chit chat. It's all in the eyes. That was a review I read of it back when it came out. The eyes have it, the clever, punny reviewer said at the end. There you go. And I loved that because they're right. These people fall in love with each other just by staring longingly at each other. And it's awesome. And it completely works. You completely buy into it.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, I mean, obviously you could say that the movie Titanic follows this sort of thing. It's you have this giant sweeping epic of a film that's just the backdrop to a romance. The same way, you know, Titanic is this giant megalithic event.
You could look at it the other way, which is that the romance in Titanic, or the romance is particularly in Pearl Harbor, which is the biggest Titanic ripoff that there is, are the excuse to tell the story of the disaster. That's the human thing that we're gonna hold on to. In Fenimore Cooper's novel and in Mann's movie, it's more organic than that. This weird romance happens in spite of their differences, in spite of the world that they're in spite of everything. There's nothing perfunctory about it. And it happens, like I say, in ways where it isn't one guy convincing a girl or a girl convincing a guy or a dude. You know, they do sort of save their lives, but even that's not played in a super heroic sort of way. And they're immediately at odds with each other after they've done that. It's just beautiful, fascinating. The axe and bow and arrow and sort of hatchet violence is incredibly choreographed and compelling. It's an amazing movie, I think. I really do think it's incredible. And it was meant to be a giant 3-hour thing. And the studio said, screw this. It can't be like this. We're going to cut this up. And he said, give me a couple of months. It can't come out in the summer, but give me a couple of months and I will cut it. At least let me have a pass at it. Yeah. And it's one of those cases where you really kind of got to believe, because I've read the script for it and it's good, but you really kind of got to believe that Last of the Mohicans isn't the smash hit Oscar season film that it ended up being if it were 3 hours long. Sure. Because nobody in 1992, whenever it came out, nobody was making films like this. Braveheart was still years away. And the last time anyone attempted a historical epic of this type was decades ago, like the 70s, truly. Yeah. So that's what he wanted to make. And he sort of made this concession that he would make it a leaner, meaner adventure film that still had substance in it. And he got that. He got it. It's great. And it's the one movie where I say, we talk about it, I won't, after singing its praises, I won't just diss on it, but it's the one movie that he does continue to tinker with, because there's so much more movie there. Mm-hmm. He's always playing with it, and every time it gets a new director-approved transfer, he does something different to it. I think now that Fox is owned by Disney, I think you'll see, I don't think Disney will be interested in giving him the opportunity to do that anymore. Sure. I don't think they care. Sure. They went ahead and released, Star Wars with McClunky in it, but that had already been done. They're just releasing the most recent version that they had. I don't think that was something they encouraged. It's just what they had on hand. I think they're less interested in that. As a matter of fact, I think whatever version of Last of the Mohicans is out there on Blu-ray or whatever is probably the last one you're going to get. So hop on it. Yep. It's good. Really entertaining, and really still, it's got all that stuff that he brings to the party too. It's both. That's tough to pull off.
Okay, so
did I ruin your point about the romance? I'm sorry, dude. I didn't mean.
No. I mean, you didn't. You just kind of clarified that. Yeah, whereas I was just thinking of like big epic scope, but our focus is on this romance, and you do bring up a good point that that it's the romance happens very quietly, but very intensely, and it's almost as if
it doesn't take center stage really, but the movie by the time it's over becomes entirely about the love between these last members of this vanishing tribe and these newest American colonial daughters. Like there's also something very metaphorically rich about it that I don't think is in those other movies. Not that we love Titanic here. That was our big disaster movie, but it really did feel like this is our way into the story, as opposed to this is remotely believable thing that happened as part of that story. I think if you think about Titanic, as ridiculous as it is, the romance, the inter-economic romance is the least believable thing about it, actually.
Sure. All right. Next up, our number 2 film is The Insider with Russell Crowe and Al Pacino.
Well, I don't love The Insider the way I love, like a little boy loves a thing, love Last of the Mohicans. But The Insider was a real candidate for number 1 on this list. I think it's less iconic. I think it's less on the nuts as to what Mann is all about as a storyteller. So I think that's why it's at number 2. But The Insider is as good a movie as he's ever made or likely to make. That's the story of a whistleblower for a tobacco company who gets wrapped up with a 60 Minutes producer and tries to tell. At first, he tries to take his severance package, go be a school teacher, kind of start his life over. But the nature of intimidation and the way these secretive tobacco lawyers and stuff sort of did their business, they just kind of keep coming at him. And he has a breaking point that is not where I think those people expected, because he's a very soft-spoken, mild-mannered guy. And yet when he's pushed to the edge and his family's threatened, he decides to fight back. He decides, first of all, because he doesn't do anything to deserve any of the threats and intimidation that he gets. Truly, he knows he signed a legally binding
NDA. Yeah,
exactly. He can't talk about any of this stuff legally, so he doesn't intend to. And yet just to systematically cover their tracks, this system of non-disclosure and secrecy just kind of beats at him in ways that he can't take anymore. And he turns to 60 Minutes producer played by Al Pacino, and Al Pacino's very, very best late period role. I would also argue this is Russell Crowe's best performance ever on film too. He won the Oscar for it, rightfully so.
He's really terrific. He's really terrific in this film.
All of his strengths as an actor, really, I mean, there's Gladiator and some other things, some other more movie star things, but all his strength as an actor really is in this guy in this wonderful way. And you really do care about him. And again, the film's a typical Michael Mann project. It's got incredible speaking about celebrities who aren't anything like their real life counterparts that they play in films, but are still awesome. Top of that list is Christopher Plummer as Mike Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
Just fantastic performance. And the story is this, it came at a time where this again, mid 90s, no, early 2000s, where this sort of 70s conspiracy kind of story just really wasn't the kind of thing that they were telling. And it has that sense of paranoia to it. As far as side actors that we love, Bruce McGill has one of the greatest speeches. I will call it a speech. It's more like an explosion. In it, he plays a Mississippi prosecutor who's bringing a case against the tobacco companies, and part of the plan of our heroes is to get Crowe's character's testimony on the record in the state of Mississippi, so that when they report the story, they have this sort of legitimacy wrapped up in it. It's all kind of complicated, but it makes a lot of sense as the movie explains it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruce McGill, for Animal House and everything else, he's 8,000 movies, but these Kentucky lawyers come down there and they start, not taking him seriously. And I mean, he gives them the smackdown of all smackdowns. I love a good courtroom drama. This is only about 10 minutes of a almost 3-hour film, but boy, is it enjoyable.
Yeah.
Really
yeah.
awesome.
I mean, it is, we've talked at great length, and I mentioned many times, All the President's Men is my favorite film. It very much has that. It's very much in that same vein. Mm-hmm. The Insiders is really terrific. In fact, I was looking for the exact quote here and I can't find it. It was like Roger Ebert was like, he was like talking about it, saying it was much more impactful to me than All the President's Men, just simply because the Watergate didn't kill my parents, cigarettes did. Wow, Roger. And wow. I hopefully I didn't butcher that quote too badly.
No, but that feels like something he would say, and that's really, really awesome. I mean, the cigarette industry, they're totally different now, and a lot of the reason was because of the thing this guy did. It started an avalanche of accountability for them. They paid their whatever it was, $4 trillion or some ungodly amount of money back to America, and America, for them admitting that responsibility, basically said, okay, go do your thing then. And at least now everything's above board. There's no more of this secret crap. There's no more of any of this. And it shows you that even the cigarette industry, to some degree, because it's still going strong, was purified by that action. And that started with this. We're going to start admitting that you're killing everybody and that you make these more addictive chemically on purpose. It's not just some byproduct of what you do. It's you heightened that. That's what this guy, that's the department he worked in. And that's the secret that he revealed, was that the addictiveness of the thing, not so much the deadliness of it, but the addictiveness of it was a chemically manufactured and enhanced thing. They didn't add things to it. They just brought the part of it in it out as much as they could that did that. Yeah. And it's stunning. And everybody screws him over. It's 60 Minutes ends up screwing him over, and he just keeps fighting. That man of integrity, this sort of Ayn Rand style man of integrity, in an Ayn Rand novel, he would work for the cigarette company as a CEO, but still, right. It still has that man of integrity, man of principle feel to it. and it just works really, really well. And Pacino's character, you know, who gets caught in the middle of it, thinks, you know, manipulates this dude, gets him to come out, gets him to act sometimes against his better interest, all because for the truth, and then to find out that the truth's not that important when money is involved. Like for him, the rude awakening of that is very intense, and it's intense to us as we're watching the movie. It's jarring and unforgivable, and it's really, really, really good, complicated story about complicated stuff that's just super well communicated. And like Joel said, that it more than even that, the mood of the thing, the sense of paranoia that hangs over the thing, the sense of behind every door there's something going on, and it's people are out to get us. You really feel that way the whole time you're watching that movie, and I love it for that. So.
All right, yeah, easily could have been number one, but our number one film, I mean, to me, it really was never in question, because this film this film is
the Michael Mann movie.
It really is. It really is. And it is 1995's Heat.
Yeah, it's like put all these other movies in a blender and pour it out in the right order. You get Heat. Our buddy, late friend Gus, called it Cops and Robbers and the Women Who Love Them.
that's pretty
and to me,
accurate.
that's like the story of all of these. You know, sure, it one's in colonial America, but it still has that same feel to it. These opposing forces of the law, of humanity, whatever. The two rams button heads throughout the movie, you know, even if only virtually. That's the thing. It's about this cop played by Al Pacino again, and a robber played by Robert De Niro. And of all the cop characters, Pacino again is kind of the ultimate one for Mann. And of all the robber characters, De Niro's character is just this perfect encapsulation of all these criminals we've seen in all of these stories.
Yep.
The total man of honor who at the same time is prepared, you know, has decided and therefore committed himself knowingly to take every step imaginable to remain free of the law, and is willing to sacrifice anything to do that. And the movie proves that.
Yeah.
A very experienced cat burglar and a robbery cop. Pacino is really fun in it. He's very, very entertaining. He has a woman he's married to played by Diane Venora, and I always consider this. She is not the typical Michael Mann leading lady. The nice girl that De Niro meets sort of is, but this you know, she's like an art student, sort of perfect thing, perfect young thing for Robert De Niro to completely be shaken off of his very singular track over. Diane Venora, on the other hand, is this most obnoxious sort of LA high society, like super, I don't know how to put it. I don't want to badger like psychotherapy or anything like that, but she's got like this psychotherapy catchphrase for literally everything in her life, in this way that a guy like Pacino,
self-help. She lives by self-help books.
Yeah, it's really, and it's for a sort of self-made, hardworking, you know, down in the dregs guy. It's you don't even, in a way, you can totally see how they came together. But in a way, they're at the point now where their relationship's sort of poisonous. She has a daughter played brilliantly by Natalie Portman when she was really young, hot off of The Professional, and she's so good in it. You don't realize at first how important it is that she make her stand every time she's in frame until she becomes the center of the story. But it's really, really well done by a young actor who understands the vulnerability of this young person. It's hard to explain, but it's just fantastic. And every role in it, Ashley Judd's at her best in it. Val Kilmer's
terrific in this film. It's
maybe the best he's ever been. He's so super cool.
Yeah.
I'm partial to some other things, like I like Willow and some other things, but just as this it just must have been so cool. Like, again, he's kind of third billed in it at a time when he was his biggest star. But he was wise enough to look at it, see who the guy was, and get it and do it, and be willing to be playing third fiddle to Pacino and De Niro, who had only ever been in one movie together, Godfather 2, and because their stories took place in different time periods, they never appeared together.
They
almost never appeared together in this.
Right, and then they realized that and went, we really need to find a place to have these guys.
Well, I think it was them that realized it. You got to have these guys come together at some point. It's cool that you've written these parallel stories for them, but you can still have that and have them have a word amongst each other. And they spent kind of the whole movie. It was the last thing they shot for it. They spent the whole movie writing something that would be worth it while for Pacino and De Niro's characters to sit down that just wouldn't just be redundant.
Yeah. And again,
it actually is redundant. What happens in that scene is not needed by the movie at all.
Nope.
But we need to see them looking each other in the eye. That's the extra component. I've seen you, I've talked to you, and I'm still the same guy I was when I walked in here. Make no mistake about it.
And they can do that.
Yeah.
And they can do that because they are both men of a code.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like, well, why aren't you just arresting him now? You can go, why aren't you arresting him now? Because he doesn't have the evidence that he needs. He knows he's done everything, but he has nothing to, tie him to it. And De Niro, and you're like, well, why, De Niro, why don't you just, either get up and leave or just say, leave me alone or whatever, but no, they're men of a code. And it's like, yeah, you come at me with everything you got. I'm going to come at you with everything I've got. And whoever wins, wins.
It's the code that shatters De Niro's plan eventually.
Yeah.
And that gets him to frankly do something other than what he's saying he's going to be doing the whole time.
Yep.
And and that's tragic in a way. It has the stuff of Greek tragedy in it because of that.
Yep.
It really does. It has some really terrible violence in it. But again, all these guys who've been in these Michael Mann movies they're all in this. Wes Studi's in it. It's got this multi-ethnic Dennis Haysbert's best movie.
Michael T. Williamson.
Michael T. Williamson. When Michael T. Williamson he's so good in it. When he's talking to Ashley Judd and he's basically manipulating her into turning in Val Kilmer, her boyfriend. And she's like, what else are you selling? Is what she says. An ultimate sort of Michael Mann damsel thing to say to him. And what does Michael T. Williamson say? He says all kinds of shit, but I don't need to sell this because we both know this shit sells itself. He looks over and he doesn't even say it. He just looks over at her little boy playing over in the corner with all these other armed guys standing around her. And she just knows. That is a work of crime story poetry. The whole movie is like that. It's a joy to behold. And yet when it means to slap you in the face and get a strong reaction out of you, it knows how to do it every time. It's the ultimate, as I say, the ultimate refinement of him. And somehow emotionally, not in 1, not in 2, not in 3, but 4 storylines, he manages to get to the emotional impact of everything. Maybe not to the degree that some movies do, but to the degree that this movie reasonably could achieve. He does it every time. And that's, to me, even more than The Insider, that's sort of what sets it apart. I thought it was the best movie of the year, although I hadn't seen last week's show. We talked about Dead Man Walking, which came out the same year. I hadn't seen that movie yet, but which ultimately I think is better. But yeah, Heat is really, really good. It's really good. It's really, really good, and it's really, really entertaining. It's a super film. Before we close the book on Heat, and then and on Michael Mann's films, so Heat started at the screenplay. It was supposed to be for a television series, television pilot, and that ended up becoming a television movie called L.A. Takedown. It's L.A. Takedown. If you're a Heat superfan, if you're a Michael Mann superfan, this is the only directorial piece of his that we have not talked about, so it's worth bringing up here. But Heat is this. They have the same story. They're the same story. The crime's the same. Everything's basically the same. Heat is expanded. The ensemble is expanded to be bigger and more important. It's a bigger, broader, has much more grandeur to it. But it's funny that the story itself comes from this old 1986, like kind of Miami Vice spinoff is what it was supposed to be, that takes place in LA between similar sorts of cops and robbers. And all that ever ended up being was a pilot that aired as a movie of the week.
Yep.
It's neat to me that Heat, for all its epicness, started as this crime show pilot. That's cool. It's called LA Takedown, and because Michael Mann directed it, it's out there. You can see it.
It's also called LA Crime Wave. It's also called Made in LA. I'm looking at the DVD cover because obviously after Heat, they're like, get this out there. We need, and it was like,
right, call it something different, and people will buy it again.
Yep. From the director of Heat, Michael Mann. Hannah is the cop. And the Heat is like it's double in size and stretched out, different font, and in bright red. And the Heat is on.
Hey,
LA Takedown.
Mike, we don't hold that against you. We get that.
No, that's not on Michael Mann at all. That's
funny.
That's I'm trying to it's like those selling of Beauty and the Beast DVDs that were made by some cheap animation company, and trying to convince people that, this is the Disney film. It's still in theaters.
Yeah, don't come right out and say that, but
yep. But it's still a Michael Mann film. So that'll do it. Heat, Heat, our number one Michael Mann film. And you think we're wrong? Because we're not. And you know what? I'm not even going to invite you to write us at Ask Joel and Ryan at Twitter and Instagram, or go to the Facebook page, The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, or to comment on the YouTube video if you're watching us on YouTube. I'm not even going to ask you to do that because you know what? We're right.
We're so right that we went against even our own instincts to make sure that Heat was number one, because it really is iconic.
Yep.
And it hasn't been bettered, and it is not likely to. Again, maybe Michael Mann's best movies yet to come. It's possible. He's still making movies.
Yep.
This isn't the John Candy list. This is more of a Sigourney Weaver list where
he is set. His next project, apparently there is a HBO series coming out called Tokyo Vice, and Michael Mann directs episode 1.
Cool.
So
I'll watch that.
Yep. All right. We got a little bit of time left. How about some hot takes, Ryan?
Let's do it.
Let's get some hot takes. Let's get some hot takes. Let's get some hot takes. Let's get some hot takes.
All right. Here we go. Okay. All right. So these these are not my hot takes. They all come from TikTok. This is the Hot Takes TikTok edition.
Nice.
Which we're going to see how my week goes. We might end up with a TikTok presence by the end of the week.
Okay.
We're going to see.
I'll leave that to you.
That's on me. That's if I decide to take on yet more stuff that I don't get paid for, but I have fun doing it. All right.
I believe you pay for the privilege of being an equal partner in the movie show with Joel and Ryan.
That's true. That's true.
I have to check my finances to make sure of that.
Yep. All right. This first one comes from this hot take comes from Seagirl 108 on TikTok, and it is in regards to Jurassic Park. Yeah. And her hot take is, and I do like this one, Nedry complains the entire movie, about how unappreciated he is and how cheap, how he should be making tons more money, and he uses it for a justification for stealing the embryos to sell off to the InGen competitor. However, by the end of the movie, a 12-year-old is able to crack the code and reboot and get the whole system up and running, saving everybody. So really, pretty much any basic computer person with a little bit of training could have done it. Thus, again, really illustrating Nedry's villainy as a character.
Look, when Nedry's system's running at the top of the movie, nobody's getting eaten by anything.
There is that. When
it shuts down, all hell breaks loose. It's more than just nature survives. It's this complicated system. Without it in place, you're just that away from being eaten alive by something that's higher on the food chain than you. So in a way, he, what's his face is out of money. This is played out more in the book than it is in the story, but the guy who's running the show has put every last penny and then some into this thing and doesn't have anything else to give this guy, but he's also paid him pretty well to do this. And it's sort of Nedry's own financial irresponsibility that's put him in this spot. But, and again, I'm talking about this from the terms of the book rather than the movie. We'll get to the movie in a second, but in the book, it's all shows you that the economic realities of our world and dinosaurs from prehistory don't mix, just like they don't mix easily with anything in the modern world. That's the point of the thing. And this is just another way in which that's shown. The little girl knowing how to reboot the system, because I think in the book, it's really just you go to where they go in that basement and flick the switch like what Ellie does, and it just starts up itself. That's the mission. It's not some little girl going, I recognize Linux or whatever.
I know this system, and I can.
But they're trying to give a little girl agency and be the hero of the moment. In a movie, that movie's pretty good, so I don't mind that. What was the premise of this hot take? I'm sort of skirting around that.
It just was once it was just kind of showing
that Nedry's system couldn't have been worth much because a little girl figured out how to reboot it.
So, a 12-year-old can figure out how to do it. So basically
that spoken, I'll just say this, and I like your hot take, it's fun, but spoken like somebody who's not on an island with a bunch of man-eating dinosaurs, I have to say, Duncan.
That's fair. I think that's a fair rebuttal. It's a fair rebuttal. All right, next one.
I'll take Nedry's software functioning anytime if that's what's between me and them. Hell yes.
This next one was it was a TikTok that made me laugh out loud. I watched it several times. It's from a young person named Cinemegan at Cinemegan. She is a film student. She's a film student, I believe, at Harvard or something like that. But she was breaking down. She wrote a paper. We're going to be doing
her top 10 list in a few years.
Yeah.
Thank you for warning me about that. I'll be a little more respectful than maybe I would.
Yeah. Well, she did a TikTok based on like a little paper that she wrote that Jurassic Park passes the Bechdel test. And the Bechdel test, if you're not familiar with the Bechdel test, it's the representation of women on screen and whether the women are just on screen as a functionary to tell the man story. And
to pass the test, you have to have two women having a conversation about something that is not a man.
Right.
Which doesn't seem like a very high bar to cross, and yet. Most films fail it,
honestly. Yep. But she says Jurassic Park passes the Bechdel test if you remember that all dinosaurs are female. And then she goes on to talk about, she's like, sure, we have Ellie and what's her face, the little girl. They have a conversation about we got to get this booted up. Hey, I can boot this computer up and let's get in there together.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yep. But then they also have, she points out when the two raptors go into the kitchen area where the two kids are hiding, and they're like, and she's like, look at these two boss ladies. They're not talking about men. They're talking about dinner. And like when the girl is talking to the Brachiosaurus, making noise and the Brachiosaurus sneezes on her. We're going to be really loose with the idea of a conversation, but that sneeze, I think, was, hey, we're cool. So Jurassic Park passing the Bechdel test. That's the hot take.
Sure. Who am I to argue with Cinemegan? She's got it all figured out. Absolutely.
I saw that one. That made me laugh out loud really, really hard.
It's a good one.
Okay. This next one is from @Marion Cosplays.
Two sisters working it out. I like that a lot. I'm not going to be able to watch that scene in the future without thinking.
I know. I'm going to be like, they're like, you want some dinner? Oh yeah. It's like, feminism. There you go. Awesome. @Marion Cosplay talks about And this really plays into, and I think this is really this hot take is prescient with especially what's going on Disney Plus and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and doing these series that all tie in, and all of this being part of it. She says no movie benefits from being 90 minutes at this point, because if you're just gonna make a movie that's 90 minutes, just make it a mini series at this point. Just put it on one of the make it a streaming series, and just put it on there. Because it's almost saying, I get, and I'm extrapolating from her hot take that 90 minutes just isn't worth the time it takes to go to a movie theater and take something in. And,
there's a thought process that goes with that, like that you make something. You make something crappy that's short and sweet, like Jonah Hex, and it's 88 minutes or whatever, and it's not worth it. There's no value in it. And it feels that way. It feels like it's over before it starts. We've talked about that very few filmmakers set out to make a 90-minute story. It usually suggests something's been omitted. But before we turned on the show, I watched Steven Spielberg's Duel, which was a TV movie, which was less than 90 minutes. It was 88 minutes. And last night I watched George Lucas's first movie, which is also 90 minutes, THX 1138. And they're awesome. They don't feel like there's anything missing or whatever. So it's 90 minutes. It can be done. And have there been any 98-minute MCU movies? There aren't any that I can think of. They've all been. I don't think there's been any sub 2-hour ones other than Thor: The Dark World. I think that's the shortest one.
I think this was I think this was I only bring it up because I don't think she's talking directly in the and I'm assuming, yes, I believe, if I remember correctly, this is she is female presenting, but I don't think that she was referring to the MCU specifically, but I think it was part of the larger conversation of, we have all of these outlets now for these stories, that the movies, cinema should, if you're only going to make something that's 90 minutes, cinema, like putting it up on the big screen where people have to come to it, pay for the drive there, pay for the.
I get what you're saying, but it's not. I get what you're saying, and I've said a similar thing for years. Joel knows. 90 minutes. Nobody makes a 90-minute movie. Beware the 90-minute movie. That's the term I use all the time. That said, that's not what the big screen, it doesn't preclude something from being awesome or cinematic or worth being on a big screen or worth being shared with a large audience. That nothing about it prevents that. So I have to disagree with this hot take pretty much completely, even though I sort of understand where it comes from in the gut, like I really do. And just because you have a streaming service to dump something on doesn't mean that that's necessarily the best place for it to be. And its runtime really isn't. It's maybe a factor, but it's several rungs down on the ladder.
That was my takeaway from it too, is as I get that take, but factoring in runtime as to whether something should be a theatrical release, that would be really far down on the list. And
streaming isn't where you should dump something. Look at WandaVision and Loki even. I mean, look at what a lower budget and more time gets you. It allows you to take so many more narrative and thematic chances than you would. And that's the beauty of having a lower budget and having more time, is that you and having, the difference between well, I always use this phrase because I think it's so fantastic, that the two people who created The Good Wife and The Good Fight, now on speaking of streaming services on Paramount Plus, they said that writing a film is like running a marathon, and writing for TV is like running until you die. And this was when Good Wife was going off the air, and they were just like, we've tried to keep this show as good as you can, but all TV shows run until they die. They just run and run and run and run, and they all die somehow. And it's great to have some control over how they die, because most of the time you don't. And it's great to think that you stayed good the whole time and that you ended on a high note. But even when you have control, achieving that with even your best intentions and all the creative juices you have left isn't always doable. Like they just recognize the reality of how difficult serialized television is. But the charm of it is the same thing that Michael Mann or David Lynch or whomever, and it's certainly true of the Disney Plus things of Mandalorian, of some shows that had their birthplaces in large cinema and now are small screen events, is that you can do different things. That's the coolest thing about it, is you really can't do the same 3-act heroic championship bit again and again and again and again, or you get sick of it after a couple of episodes.
Yep.
You got to do something different. And that's what is to love about it. I'm sick of all of it. We're talking about MCU specifically, but even just all of this stuff. It's just like, I'm get tiring of it, but it's neat to see it on TV, even though on TV, 10 episodes of this, 10 episodes of that, 10 more of this, 10 more of that. It gets old quicker. You become less forgiving of it. So there's some challenges built in. But the great thing is that there could be no WandaVision movie. That just couldn't exist. There's no chance that they could have done that in a cinematic forum. So instead of playing to the weaknesses and putting the bad stuff here and the good stuff there, look at what the strengths of each thing are and try and bring that out of it every time as best you can. That's all we can ask of the creative people out there, I think. Yeah,
that's great. All right, folks, that is going to do it for us for this week. And do you know what we have? Do we have our topic for next week? Can we tease something? I don't think we do. We don't.
Unless you just thought of something.
No, I didn't just think of something, but I was trying to remember if we had any other guests coming up very soon here.
We got nothing. We got nothing but the cold blank white page of doom and the endless horizon without so much as a cactus in sight.
Well, then I will say I will reiterate what we said at the very top of the show. Dear listener, you are so wonderful. Indeed. And if there's something you would like us to talk about, hey, if you want to talk about it with us, you should reach out to us at all the things I mentioned earlier. I'll say them again, at Ask Jill and Ryan on Twitter and Instagram, the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page on Facebook. And if you were watching us on YouTube, comment below, comment and like and subscribe and do all of the clicking and the thumbs and everything.
Coming soon to TikTok, right, Joel?
And possibly, I had an idea earlier today as I was going through, and I was like, I need one more hot take. And so I was on TikTok again this morning. I'm like, hey, and I saw I'm like, oh, well, there's a way I could put us on there. We'll see how industrious I get this week. I had a busy week this week. I have no reason to think that next week won't be as busy. So chances are we won't be on TikTok.
But if we do, hanging with us.
I'll let you know. All right, folks, we really do appreciate you being with us today on the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. And until next week, we'll see you later. Bye.
Happy birthday, Klug. Woohoo!
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.
If we wanted Klug to come, we should have done best benevolent zombies or best Bette Midler cameos or I don't know, something different than Michael Mann films, I suspect. But happy birthday, pal.